Our first item on the, we don't have minutes?
We do have
We do have minutes.
Where are they?
They're in the behind.
Oh, sorry. First item is the October 16th meeting minutes. Are there any corrections? Okay.
Move approval.
Second.
Okay. Any other further comments? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, this motion passes unanimously with 3 of the 4 members present for the vote. Next item is our Greenlight Pinellas plan. Brad, Cassandra.
Yes, and so this is an action item for the planning committee to recommend to the PSTA board to approve of the Greenlight Pinellas plan in totality. This is a compilation of all of the work we've been doing over the last several years in the whole Greenlight Pinellas plan. Since we just ran through this with the finance committee earlier today, which is 50% of the committee, and Ms. Bajowski has already seen this presentation in its full glory when she at the Greenlight Council, and she'll see it again in the MPO today.
We saw it at ACPT too.
Saw it at ACPT. I think what I'd like to do is have Cassandra very quickly go through the plan elements again, and then I will much faster, but cover. I've added back a number of the Ernst & Young slides on the financial assumptions that I think will at least respond to some of the questions that were asked at the finance committee for the 2 of you, and then maybe Julie and Patty, you can ask questions too when we go to the finance committee. Is that good? Good. Okay.
Is this I just want to make sure this is right. So I'm going to go over briefly, as Brad mentioned, the elements of the plan and let him wrap up with the financial elements. This is the map that we've been looking at over the last few years, really, especially over the last few months, about what the physical elements are of the Greenlight plan. That transformational bus service, the implementation of rail, but also the impact of those elements on our land use and how we continue to develop. Some things that we'll also talk about today are the community access. Some of the comments that we've been getting from the public are, how do I get to that bus rapid transit line? How do I get to that rail station? And so we'll talk about walking and biking and driving and how you access those stations as well. With this vision plan, we've also developed, in combination with the financial plan, a phasing strategy. And so I'll go over that, as well as how we will remain accountable to the public through our delivery plan. And then Brad will wrap up with the financial plan element. So, as we've heard before, the foundation of this system is the bus program and the expansion of this bus program and the changes that we would make from going from a hub system to a grid system. Overall, this would be a 65% increase in our bus service and have some major capital investments along 6 of our rapid transit lines, or our BRT lines. The second part of the plan would be the implementation of a 24-mile rail system. This would include connections to our 3 major employment centers of Clearwater, the Greater Gateway area, and downtown St. Petersburg, as well as the neighborhoods in between through 16 stations. We've been working with the MPO and other planning partners on how this also impacts our economic development and our future land use, especially around the rail stations and the BRT lines, and what those areas might look like. And I'll get into a little bit more detail in a minute. But something that I want to pause and take a look at is that community access element. And that is, how will bicycles be accommodated? They will be accommodated both on the buses and on the rail, but also have amenities at the stations so that people can easily ride their bicycles. We all know that every person that is transported on public transportation is a pedestrian first and last. And so making sure that those elements are part of the plan is critical to the overall success. We've also been asked a lot of questions about park and rides. And yes, we'll have a parking element at every single rail station and some of the bus rapid transit stops, varying in different degrees depending on where they are. But you will be able to drive to a station or drive to a BRT stop and then take the transit in. Public outreach and engagement has been a critical cornerstone of the Greenlight Pinellas plan, and how we've engaged the public over a period of years to really listen and incorporate their comments into the plan. We did this through the Pinellas Alternatives analysis through 2011. We started again with the community bus plan and got some really good input from the community on what that should look like. And we also talked to landowners and business owners and what they would like to see in their station areas, again, working with the local jurisdictions. And as Greenlight Pinellas, we've done over 100 presentations that staff, plus all of the briefings and presentations that Brad has done to local community groups, business organizations, as well as city councils. We actually did 3 last night as staff across the county. It was really amazing to see at least 6 staff members out that night talking to people. As many of you know, we've also been working through our Greenlight committees, making sure that as the ACPT, the Advisory Committee for Pinellas Transportation, is our government committee. We engaged a group of civic leaders and a group of business leaders so that each one would have their own opportunity to voice their opinion about the plan. As part of this plan, we've talked about a phasing strategy, understanding that the potential referendum would happen in November of 2014, but we wouldn't institute that sales tax until January of 2016, and then PSTA wouldn't start seeing receipts from that sales tax until March of 2016. And so even though we would have some small improvements in 2015, our larger improvements really start in 2016. In the early, do you have a question?
I do. Because when we get to that part, they want to know when my house tax is going down.
Right.
When we get to the point of, we're going to do it in 14, but we're not going to expand until 16, where's my tax?
We have the opportunity, we have to tell the tax collector what we are doing as PSTA. And we have one time a year where we can tell them that. And so we have to do that, and probably it would be the summer of 15. So the sales tax passed in 2014, the PSTA board would be asked to eliminate the property tax in 2015, but you would have 5 months where PSTA would not be generating any tax dollars at all before the sales
You and
tax.
I understand that.
Yeah,
But when I'm over at the mainlands or at the chamber or anywhere
Right.
else, they want one question. When
Right.
do I get my money? When do I get my tax bill cut?
you would see that 0 in 2015.
Are you suggesting that this slide should show that?
I think somehow it has to be worked into what we're saying. Because every time, that's the question that comes back. Because as sophisticated as I feel that our audiences are, the bottom line for them is, how much is it going to cost me and when am I getting my money?
I would have to agree.
Good idea.
I really would have to agree. I mean, I know I've asked that question.
Mhm.
It is simple, but it's complicated, if
Very.
that makes any sense.
Very.
And so I've had to ask that question several times myself. And I'm listening to this stuff all day.
Tell me
Feels like every
when
day.
you all feel you pay your property tax.
November.
November?
And we get the bill in August.
You get the trim notice
The trim
in early
notice in
August. The PSDA board votes in September, and people actually get their bill in November.
They'll have already had, by the referendum in 2014, so by their November vote, they'll probably
We've got the
within
trim
that
notice.
week, they've already got the trim notice, but within that week, they'll be getting the bill. And if they don't have a mortgage, that's when they'll be looking to pay. If not, the
Well,
mortgage
if
company
it's
will be
approved.
paying.
I'm sorry,
If it's approved.
that's not accurate.
Well, no, they don't have to pay in November. They can pay all the way up until April.
November 2014, when they vote, the PSTA board will have voted on a trim notice and the budget by then,
Yes,
with
that's
the
what I'm
property
saying.
tax still in place.
No, that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that.
Okay.
You asked when would they get their bill. That's the question I was answering. So when they're voting in November 14 on referendum, they will have had their tax bill with PSTA on their property taxes.
Right, and so do you feel that we can tell voters that they will get a zero bill in July? Is that truthful, or in July of 15, or with their trim notice, or do you
I
think?
don't know, you've got to tell us. That's
Yeah,
what
that
we're
would-
asking you.
Yeah, that would be July 15, or
I would
August
suggest-
15.
We would say for the 2015 bill that you received,
Okay,
Yeah,
whatever day that
That covers it.
arrives.
Yes, the first date up there should say fiscal 2015
Tax bill.
tax bill, property tax
Will be
drops
zero.
to zero.
yeah,
And then,
good idea.
And is that,
That's true, that's true.
that is true, that is accurate, that is what we're planning. So if it passes in November 2014, their tax bill that they receive in 2015 will be zero.
For PSTA,
Is that true?
yes.
Because we do tax,
Ad valorem
Well, there's
taxes are all
behind.
broken down.
no, I know, but
Yes.
the bill that you're getting in November, now that we brought this up, I just want to make sure I'm clear. I don't mean to complicate this conversation. I know we're on a limited time. But the bill that we get in November, or the bill that we get, whatever time in 2015, the trim notice in the bill, is that the bill, are we paying ahead or are we paying back? We're paying ahead, correct?
You're paying for the. ahead
Because
for the
when we
budget.
raise taxes in our cities,
Yeah,
you're, okay.
it's based on your prior house value, but it's for the
So-
next budget, next year.
So let's just be clear, because of the timing, they will, because they paid their taxes ahead in November 14. They will have paid for, the year of 2014 in their property taxes.
Well,
But
undoubtedly.
because of timing, there's no way.
Undoubtedly, some voters
There's
will
no
think,
way.
I voted yes for this, why is my tax bill comes in maybe the next day after the
Yeah,
vote?
there's no way to do that.
They'll
Okay.
say next,
And the sales tax, let's just be clear, the sales tax begins January 1, 16. Okay, so there will be a time that there will be no taxes paid at all going to transit.
Correct.
There will be a period of time, 6 months or something like that,
3 months.
3 months, whatever.
Sounds good.
Yes, I do think, and I think that should be pointed out too, by the way. But yeah, I do think that we
You
have to
almost
answer
could-
that question.
you almost should have a separate slide that
The
addresses.
Dunedin chamber, when they made that, they just could not believe it. They thought this was the greatest thing they'd ever heard, that, they didn't think a government had ever done that the tax would go away before the other one would kick in. That one, it was one guy, but he was
It's true.
dumbfounded by that. But pleasantly happy.
But I do think you should have, I think Bill's right, you should have a slide on it for general purposes. But when we are talking to the public, keep it simple. You know how they say, keep it simple, stupid.
Yeah.
Keep it simple. Yeah, but yeah, I do think that needs to be pointed out, and it's a good point. Patricia, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you.
So in that case, with the elimination of the property tax in 2015 and the beginning of the property tax in 2016, we would not see those receipts until March of that year. And so that's when we would be able to start expanding the service. So we would initially start with maximizing our existing bus fleet in 2016, hiring new operators in order to expand our service hours, the span of service, that would be for nights and weekends, so have more service at those times. Then we would start our larger bus purchases in 2017 with increased frequencies on all our routes in 2018 and 2019. During that time, we'd also be looking at our bus rapid transit or our rapid corridors, looking at what capital investments need to be made in these corridors in order to create a limited stop, rapid service running every 15 minutes until midnight. So in early 2016 and in 2017, we'd be looking at going through our environmental phase and our capital procurement and installation phase for 3 of those routes with an opening in 2018, and then again 3 other projects for the remaining 6 corridors with an opening in 2019, 2020, and 2021. After the bus system is fully in place, we would then implement the rail. But during that time, we would also be going through the federal environmental clearance process of the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA as it's up there, and our engineering from 2018 to 2020. The next 3 years would be vehicle procurement and construction with an opening in 2024.
And can I stop and ask a
Yes.
question as well? That's somewhat rhetorical, but it is a question that I've had. We have on our map there a broken line going to Tampa over the Howard Franklin. And after all these meetings, I've really never been clear about this. Do we indeed have money? Will we indeed have money to partner with the other agencies to build that? Going to Howard Franklin.
No. We don't have in the scenarios that Ernst & Young has played out over the period, the capital costs or funding going to the capital costs or the operating costs for the rail to Tampa, for that dash line.
Okay. But yet it is on our map. And we're okay with that. Because we're showing what it's perceived that is going to happen. I mean, how would we fund it? Do we have possibilities of doing that? We don't think that's an impossible thing?
It's not impossible.
No, it is not included in our current financial plan, but it could be included as the next phase. So as you talk about the financial plan, near the end of those years, you see a big upswing in the amount of cash we have because we'll have built out the system, and then at that point just be operating. It would be at that point that we can start expanding the system. Now, if the revenues turn out to be higher than we expect, and we can have a policy to maintain our costs, and we can do all the things that Ernst & Young is saying, we could be able to do all of this a little bit sooner. I mean, pay off the debt service a little
Sure.
sooner, or start expanding a little bit sooner.
We have money in the financial plan for a express bus system across the Howard Franklin Bridge that could ostensibly use the managed lanes that are kind of put on there. So if a rail was built, we wouldn't probably need to run a parallel bus. So we'd have that money that could be freed up to operate it. And then as she says, I mean, there's, in the outer years of the Ernst & Young plan, there is capacity that we could share.
I think it's an important,
Okay.
important
I
point
just
to
want
keep
to
it
know
on the
that
map.
because
Yes.
2 questions I get. Well, one big question is, are we building a rail to nowhere? And
I never thought of
my answer is always absolutely not. We're fighting.
Are you making
Maybe
a comment on the economic viability of St. Petersburg Stillwater? Nowhere? What do you mean by that?
No, I'm saying that's not what I say. What I get, a piece of feedback I get is, are we building a rail to nowhere where it is not connecting to any other region? It's one tiny little place. And they're not saying nowhere because these places aren't important. they're thinking larger, you know, why would you not connect?
Right.
That makes a rail line more economically viable if it's connecting somewhere. So if the rail line there would connect to Tampa, people feel better about it. They feel that it's more economically viable, and it's a stronger reason to have it, okay? That's the feedback I'm getting. I'm not saying any of what I just said is right, wrong, or whatever. So then they say, well, is there money in the plan for it? And you know, especially now that we've gone through this financial analysis and knowing that 100 different scenarios could happen, I feel confident about our financial analysis. But I didn't see anywhere in there anything to do with that connection. And knowing that a sales tax is not something that we can just raise like a millage, I'm asking, we know how important this connection is. You know, is there the possibility, or is it so out of whack to have it in there? And that's why I'm asking.
We've always said that that is the next step.
Got it.
And even though the financial plan that we have right now does not include it, it needs to be on the map to demonstrate to our partner agencies that that is our next step. So that when they do expand the bridge, that we're at the table saying, this is what we want and this is what we want you to prepare for. When Hillsborough sees that ours is successful and they want to reconstitute their system and connect to this, that they understand that that's a critical component for us. And so I think leaving it off the map would be a long-term.
No, and I totally agree with you. It needs to be there. I just want to know, and I'm sorry that I haven't brought it up before. It just, Bill.
I think your point is good. And let me ask, do we know what it would cost? Let's say DOT builds the bridge. They put the strengthened super understructure in for that. And then they go ahead and build the expansion. What would be the cost of adding rail across half of the bridge?
I haven't seen any cost of just half of the bridge.
Well,
So I would
I'm
have to
saying,
get that.
He's saying the one direction.
For us to
One
change,
direction,
for us to
you're saying.
change the decking from
From-
Gateway to the Pinellas County line, I will have
assuming
to.
that Hillsborough would pay for the other half. I
Right,
mean, is it
yes, I would
is
have to
it-
get you that number. I know that on an annual basis.
$5 million? Is it $150 million? To just put the rail halfway across. I just, or you put it all the way across.
I'd like to know. I'd like to know what that is too.
Just,
Well, it's probably in the order of magnitude, our $80 million
Yes.
a mile number.
Right, so you're talking about another 4 miles.
150.
well, the $80 million, I would expect that it would be less than that because you don't have any right-of-way, you don't have any
That's true.
control systems, you don't have any crossings, you don't, but the philosophy is, okay, we get to 25 new bridges built, and we find that this is, let's say this is taken off, and it's so wonderful that the people in Hillsborough have then approved it, and then we go through it. Do we have enough money to build the connection, or at least cover half of the incremental cost to Tampa to connect into their system? And is it, so,
I agree with you, Bill. I'd like to know that. It just, now that we've gone through this financial analysis, I just think it's important that I know that that is the next step, but given the fact that we are getting questioned about it, knowing those numbers will sort of tell us, yeah, that's a possibility, we could do that or not.
Thank you. I think that, well, numbers change every day, and having in the past couple of months learned so much about fantasy and reality in my own life, is there a way to say that PSTA is more than happy and willing and working towards being able to join up. That we're there, we want to join up, we want to go across the bridge, we want to make this a working regional plan without saying anything about dollars.
Oh, yeah, this plan is not gonna say dollars. I mean, I'm just saying, I want us to know just as a working group, not to be out
Now,
talking about.
I understood that, but the idea is just like you said, it's sitting there and many people are asking and wondering. And that's our plan after this plan.
Right.
We're working way ahead. We're working to put this region together.
Yeah, I think we can say that. I think we are saying that, but I think we can make those statements.
And we have some very positive news that's just come out where the Secretary of Transportation for the state was just in
Right.
town and he committed to rail across the Howard Franklin Bridge.
Which is,
Now, he didn't have any money, he didn't have any check, but he committed.
which is phenomenal.
I think,
Yeah.
I think that's the point, is if somebody asks about that, this is a regional consideration, so the main expense would be picked up by the state and by the feds. And perhaps our financial commitment will be to be laying track halfway across the thing, and that's a minimal expense, as Commissioner Johnson pointed out.
We're ready to.
I don't think we can ever use the word minimal when we're talking about rail, so, but I understand where you're going.
It would be within the magnitude of
Yes.
possibility.
Yes.
And
So if you could just, I think
Well, so
I
just,
think that's where we're trying to get to. By seeing a number, I think that we could easily say, yes, that is within the reach. But I don't think it's a number we want to put out there, and of course it would be in today's dollars. Okay, all right, I'm sorry if we've interrupted you, as we always do.
One of the things that we took a good hard look at is how we would remain accountable to the public. Again, we're telling them what we're going to be doing in terms of what our program is and our implementation timeline. And so we've come up with some ideas of how we would continue to have a dialogue with the public about moving our projects forward. And these are the three recommendations. I'll go through each one. The website we would have up would include a project tracker where people could look at projects, send us comments, and be very interactive. We would recommend two committees. One that would focus on the capital side, the implementation oversight committee, and we would recommend that this committee be constituted of business professionals that are going to be able to comment on our projects and give us some good advice. So professionals from industries like banking and finance, accounting, engineering, planning, architecture, like that. The other committee would be a Transit Riders Advisory Committee that would replace our current Transit Advisory Committee, but be more diverse and make sure that they are diverse in terms of geography, but also that they have students and professionals and dart riders, and make sure that it's a balanced rider perspective. They would be focused on the operations, but both committees would report directly to the PSTA board and potentially other boards, again, as those citizen oversight committees. We would also continue the programs that we have started, going out to speak to people, to engage them, to make sure that people are aware of what we're doing. You see up there, Fast Tracks Pass in Denver, and a couple years later, after their program, 85% of the people said it's still a good idea, and so it's still overwhelming support. So it's important to understand how people are feeling about what you're doing. We would also have an annual report that we would distribute to the community. And I'll have Brad finish up with the financial plan. I know you've all seen some of this from Ernst & Young. And so this is some changes to the base case and some of those sensitivity analyses that you've been asking for.
Okay. I would, since most of you have seen some of this, I would like your feedback on the best way to present this incredibly complex information in a reasonable time, because I'm struggling mentally with how I'm going to be able to do that coming forward.
For HNTB, I can't recall who they are, and I wondered if you can maybe upfront establish who they are and their credentials, because I didn't get that.
Okay. So PSTA has contracted, yes, they board approved contracts with both, with HNTB and Ernst & Young. You know Ernst & Young because they're one of the big 8 accounting firms, and they have a subsection of Ernst & Young that are capital infrastructure advisors that we've been working with. HNTB is, I think, one of the largest engineering firms in the U.S. So, you know, they're the engineers. The Ernst & Young guys are the finance guys. HNTB is a worldwide organization that has thousands of employees and has tons of rail engineers, they have highway engineers, they work a lot with FDOT. And so we have contracted with the two firms to do two totally separate tasks. The HNTB engineers looked at the other engineers, Jacob Engineering's cost estimate for the rail project. They brought their rail engineers in to look at the track costs and the signal costs, and they brought their right-of-way appraisers in to review the right-of-way costs, all those line items in the proposed plan, sort of as a straight-up, I would describe it almost as an audit of that 2011 Jacobs engineering estimate of 1.5 to 1.7 billion. Then taking those numbers and then also taking the bus study consultants, TMD's numbers straight up, not passing judgment on whether they are good numbers or not, trusting that they are the right numbers. Ernst & Young came in as financial folks and built the sustainable program out to 2050 with the debt service scenarios and the revenue and expense assumptions, if that makes sense. So again, my presentation on this first covers what the HNTB work was, and then it goes into the 2 phases of the Ernst & Young work that they've completed thus far. They have 2 more to go, but they have completed a base case scenario that shows how this plan is financially sustainable over the long haul, given the sales tax revenue. And then what they have done subsequent to the last PSTA board meeting is now test 4 additional scenarios that they call stress cases. What if something goes wrong? What if the economy has problems, or the various scenarios? What they still have to do, and what they still owe us, is a written, it's all in writing, a written report. They owe us an evaluation of whether a public-private partnership, a P3 type of delivery plan, where a private entity would design, build, operate, and maintain the service, the rail service, whether that would be a viable or a good thing to do. And they're going to do one other thing. Oh, they're going to give us recommendations, specific detailed recommendations on their reserve fund recommendations that the PSA board can adopt. HNTB looked at the cost estimate on the rail project and validated that in 2011 constant dollars it would be 1.68 billion, which is right in line with what Jacobs thought it would cost. But even within that number, they slightly increased the contingency, which that bottom chart shows is quite substantial. We still maintain a substantial, very conservative contingency amount in that base cost for the rail, which actually, if you add the 21% allocated contingency, that means it's allocated to specific line items, and you add that plus a 12% over the top contingency on the entire amount, you're at a 33% contingency, which if you equate that, or the way you describe that, is really a 50% contingency. There's a 50% markup on the base cost of the rail included in our plan, That's just continues. It also is consistent with other transit systems. This is, Jacob did some of these cost comparisons a couple of years ago, and HNTV has come back and used even more recent rail systems that have been built across the country, and it compares quite comparably and favorably to those estimates. Then Ernst & Young, again, Ernst & Young has done two things. They did a base case, and then they developed these scenarios, 4 stress scenarios. The base case, again, assumes the sales tax, a 1% sales tax in Pinellas County, and so it's critical to try to understand how that sales tax works, what its experience has been. This graph shows the trend of sales tax growth rates in Pinellas County over the last 20 years, and the black line shows the average of those bars, equaling 3.11% over time. You can see many years it was much higher than 3%, and then there was a recession in 2002 after September 11th, and then there was the Great Recession of 7, 8, 9, 10. But then in other years, it has grown. This FY12 last year, it grew just under 5%. They also converted that HNTB $1.68 billion constant cost for the rail, and they expanded that to a year of expenditure capital cost. So the 1.68 in constant dollars equates to 2.493 billion in year of expenditure dollars. As Cassandra pointed out, the rail we don't start building the rail until 2019, and it opens in 2024. So it's out into the future, so you have to inflate the costs. There's an inflation factor built in over that period of time. This graph and the subsequent graph show the Ernst & Young base case scenario, assuming those costs over time. This first graph is a capital cost graph. It shows, obviously, that the rail is very expensive, but it's an upfront cost. Same with the bus. The buses, the capital cost of the bus, to start out, in 17 it goes over $100 million we're going to be spending on buying additional buses and implementing those bus rapid transit stations. And then they repeat as we replace buses and then ultimately rehab the rail cars out here in 2037. But if you add up all those bars, they don't equal the long-term effect of the operating expense on PSTA. We also have to make sure that we have enough money to operate the system, which is, the general public, when we're out, they don't really think about that so much. But over time, the bus costs, since we have so many more bus operators and so many more much more bus service than we do the one rail line, it far exceeds. And the whole key to the game on this over time is managing this operating cost growth within our revenue stream. Then what Ernst & Young did in a very eloquent, artistic way was take those capital and operating assumptions and build up a financing scenario to see if it was cost affordable within that sales tax revenue. So they are assuming fare box revenue, federal and state grants, advertising revenue like we have now. But when you net all those out and you figure out how much has to be paid for by the sales tax, you get this graph. The rail costs are shown in black. And they're not spiky like in the first graph because they are now financed through debt. So that those high capital costs are financed over a long period of time with debt. The bus costs are shown in gray, and they add on top of the black. So the net is what you see here, and then all has to fit under that black line, which is the sales tax growth. The sales tax, the 1% sales tax starts out around 130 million, but by FY17, it will be just under 150 million and grows at 3%.
Should we make the point that this is both capital and operating cost? Is that what this graph?
Yes.
I think you do have to make that point because that's a question that I have been asked to ask you. Is
Yes.
to ensure that this is not just about capital and that the stress scenarios that you talk about, operating and maintenance are included in those stress scenarios, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. This is
Yes.
operating and
I
capital
think it is
combined.
important because I had somebody who watched this presentation and came back and asked that question. So they missed somewhere. Doesn't mean we did something wrong, but it wasn't stressed enough, maybe. They felt it was more of a capital discussion versus operation.
This is a catch-all. It includes operating, capital, and debt service costs.
Yes.
Net of revenue.
Net of other
After-
revenues. Yeah.
Yes.
Local
Yeah.
revenue.
Patricia?
I was, forever and ever, I've been working on the internet sales tax. And if the governor will leave it alone, it will be gray, and it'll pay a lot more, and the lines will look much better. However, it is, and I met with Governor Scott, it is his intention that all internet sales tax revenue be revenue neutral, which means we wouldn't get our little paws on a penny
How can you do that?
with a stroke of a pen.
No, but I mean, how do you take sales tax? Maybe I'm being very naive. I mean, sales tax is sales tax. How do you divert?
Maybe he would
The
reduce
bill
it.
will not pass. He will wipe it off, whatever it is, unless it's revenue neutral. Now, last year, it almost passed, and it almost passed with the caveat, revenue neutral. So it's back up again this year. I don't agree with the, if I make the tax here, I want the tax here to spend.
I still don't
So I'm
understand how he
wondering-
does that.
By revenue neutral, instead of continuing at 6%, it could continue at 5.87%.
Okay, all right.
But
And
not,
I-
would
and
not
our-
affect the 1 cent.
Correct.
Well, and our plans are not including any kind of thoughts of internet sales tax, so I
We're
wouldn't
not
worry
going
about that. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, since the finance committee this morning, and I guess I added back some of the slides that were previously shown that get into some of the more details, but it helped me do a better job of answering all the questions that I got, that I was bad at answering. The Ernst & Young folks did a lot of work since the last PSTA board meeting to take further scrutiny at that base case scenario, to make sure that it was as conservative as it needed to be and as realistic if there was anything that was not realistic. And one key change they made, actually it was on my next slide here. They increased the ongoing operating and maintenance costs for the whole PSTA system from 3.25%, which they previously had shown, to 3.5% beginning in 2017. Now, it doesn't seem like a lot,
Oh, it is.
but it is a lot over time, and it's substantially more than what PSTA's actual cost growth has been over the last several years. They also did a lot more detailed management of the debt and planning for the debt service, and that is all captured on this page. You probably don't remember this, but in the graphs that were shown to the PSTA board back in the end of October, there was a large buildup of cash at the beginning of the plan that then was metered out over the long haul. And they've totally changed that. When I'm going to show you the graphs now, you won't see that kind of bubble of cash at the beginning, because now they're recommending that we issue less debt and we use some pay-as-you-go funds to pay for the rail and the bus. they're recommending using $250 million of what they call pay-go or pay-as-you-go funds instead of issuing debt on the rail plan as the base case. Yeah, previously it had been 100% debt financed, and now it's mostly debt financed, but it has that $250 million in pay-go. They sculpted the principal repayment. We talked about this at the Finance Committee. The principal, the largest amount of debt would be issued under a federal loan program called PSTA. And we will figure out the name of that, what that stands for. There's a lot of flexibility that the federal government encourages you to use for transportation investment. They recently, just this past week, announced the largest PSTA loan ever for the rebuilding of the Tappan Zee Bridge, I-95 up north of New York City. $1.6 billion is the loan. The whole bridge is like, must be double. It has to be at least double that. I guess, no, it's 4 times as much as that. It must be $6 billion to build that bridge. Ernst & Young is recommending that we adopt some new policies of PSTA to build up our reserves to sustain this program. Maybe I won't go into the details of all these reserves. There's a revenue stabilization reserve fund, which we don't have today, but we would implement that kind of would help us manage growth over time. So that in years of good, we would store money, kind of like a squirrel, and then in years of downtime, we could tap into that reserve. We would increase our operating expense fund back to 3 months where it used to be, and we would institute a debt service reserve fund once we issued debt. Now, so they have made even the base case more conservative than what you saw previously. And then they layered onto that base case 4 stress scenarios that are listed there. Number 1, reducing the sales tax revenue growth rate below 3% to different levels over a long period of time. Number 2, reducing the FTA grant funding from the federal government. Number 3, increasing the cost of the rail program if there was cost overruns. And number 4, if there were recessions or a sales tax revenue shock where it would plummet because of a recession. And then they came up with what they call mitigation strategies that PSTA could employ if any of these things happen. Now, sort of up front, or to get to the chase, is all of the recommendations that they made don't affect the actual services that Cassandra showed in the implementation plan. They don't affect the amount of buses or the bus service we provide or the rail program. They just manage the financing assumptions and the cost growth assumptions to manage these impacts. We always have the ability to adjust the program to reduce the growth in the expansion of the bus or the rail or whatever, but they didn't touch that. Again, this is a repeated chart from that earlier one I showed you that showed the total cost of the rail program. Although now it shows that $250 million would come right out of the sales tax to pay for the capital cost of the rail. It wouldn't be 100% debt financed anymore. You can see these numbers. This TIFI alone would be $822 million, half of what the Tappan Zee Bridge just got. Now maybe that's a more nationally significant project than ours. I don't know. Pinellas is pretty awesome. Stress case number 1 is, what if the sales tax doesn't grow at 3% like it had in the last 20 years, but it grows at something less than 3%? They essentially didn't change the overall financing plan. They looked at 2 different alternative scenarios. The dotted line shows a 2.75% rather than a 3% growth, and then the shaded line, the gray line, shows a 2.5% growth rate over time instead of a 3.5. I'm sorry, a 3% growth rate, which is the black line, the base case. This graph shows PSTA's cash balance under those three scenarios out to 2050. And on the cash balance, even if the growth rate would only grow at 2.5%, their analysis shows that we would be able to implement the program and be okay. They also looked at other ways to look at the same assumptions, and the most principal analysis they did was on the debt. Are we issuing too much debt under these different scenarios to be conservative? What they told me was that the bonding reviewers and holders, what they principally look at is something called the gross debt service coverage ratio. The gross debt service coverage ratio. What proportion of your revenue stream of the sales tax, how much more is that than your annual debt payments? Not counting your operation at all. Ernst & Young is suggesting that we set a bar of having 3 times as much sales tax revenue at all times, 3 times as much as the debt service payments. And our debt service payments would never equate to 33% of our total sales tax. And we're not even close to that. Under that scenario, all of these stress cases never even come close. They're way up higher. So that's never a pinch point. What is a pinch point is this thing called net debt service coverage ratio. It's a financial, theoretical, mathematical formula. It's not actual a reality because our bond covenants would require us to pay the debt service right off the top of our revenue stream. But as you see here on this graph, this is a graph of the net debt service coverage ratio. And what this red line represents is that a 1.15 net debt service coverage ratio, which Ernst & Young is recommending based on what other transit systems have had. And what that means, what 1.15 net debt service coverage ratio means, is that after you take out the sales tax and other revenues and net out all of your operating expenditures, so the only amount you have left over is for debt service, how much money do you have for that? And so a 1.15 ratio would mean you'd have a 15% cushion. You'd have 15% extra left over after you pay for all of your operating and capital with the sales tax to pay debt service. And under the 3%, which is the black line, and under the 2.75, it's not really a problem. Under the 2.5% growth rate scenario, it starts to become very challenging. It drops below the 1.15. It doesn't drop below 1, which is to make sure you have all of the money you need to pay the debt service. But it does drop below the 1.15, and so Ernst & Young suggested that you would need to make some adjustments to your program in order to not issue that amount of debt if the sales tax were going to only grow at 2.5%. Stress case number 2, and this is probably the stress case that I've been hearing lately from the various committees that we've been showing this. This is the question we most often get. What happens if we don't get the federal funding that we are anticipating receiving? Again, going back here, the base case scenario calls for us receiving 37.6% of the cost of the rail out in the future from the federal government, from the federal New Starts grant funding program. 37.6. That program allows, and I'm certain if this is successful, we will apply for 50%. Our application will be for 50% because you're allowed to ask for 50%. I provided at your places a memo talking in more detail about this because since I've gotten so many questions, I've been trying to do more research into what is the viability of us getting federal grant funds for this program. Again, the base case assumes 37.6. And according to my numbers, the vast majority of current programs that are being implemented and the ones that are even in design that are on their way to being approved by the federal government are receiving federal support far in excess of 37.6, our base. What this stress case scenario is to drop that 37.6% to 25 or 24.9, to take about $300 million out of the federal government number and put that on the locals, bringing the feds down to 24.9. Now, of the current rail systems across the country that are implementing rail or other New Start projects, I think they are all rail, there's not one program that the federal government has only participated in at 25% level. The only one that I think is at 26% is a $7.3 billion subway under Manhattan, which is the most expensive transit project ever in the United States. But that is so high, and the New York City Transit System has so much local money that they are providing, I think, 26% match from the feds. The rail to Dulles Airport in the Washington, D.C. area, which is, I think, what my memo says about $5 billion project, they're at a 30-some% match on that, right in our base case. So this is a very conservative estimate that they would drop us down to 25%, but in summary, Ernst & Young has managed the financing of our program in order to cover this, if the scenario were to occur. What they did was increase the pay-go funds, increase the money that we would pay out of the sales tax directly to fund the capital rail from $250 to $395. They increased the borrowing, and they managed that TIFIA loan to cover the difference. Again, on the cash flow basis, it's not really a substantial problem or an issue under this stress case scenario. It gets close down here during the construction period of the rail, but over time it's okay. Where it gets to be an issue is on that net debt service coverage ratio again. You can see this case, the TIFIA loan would not be implemented until the opening day after construction occurs. So that's why it's way out here in the 2020s. But it just hovers right around that 1.15. And even though it looks to us unfinancial experts as if that black line goes below the red line, the Ernst & Young folks say with additional work they can manage that. They can manage for that scenario to be okay.
Okay, I gotta stop it.
Okay.
We have 8 minutes till 12 o'clock.
Okay.
You asked a question, what would help the financial, what would help, you wanted some feedback on your presentation of the finances and how you, the financial
Yeah.
amounts, how you can cut it down.
You have some ideas?
You put, it's important to us, but like NPL, county, all, the people that you're making presentations to, under the stress case scenarios, you could get rid of all those charts and just simply bullet point what they saw and what they did. Because those charts put people to sleep and it makes you talk more. It's just my opinion. I think you could really say, we looked at
These
X.
four things.
Get rid of the page that has all the numbers on it, with all the dollars on it. Just say, we were originally going to finance this. Now, if we change the financing method, is it a perfect case scenario? No, but we can still afford it. That's all you really have to say. If they want to see details, you can get into it. But that was just one stress, and it took that long. And I think you can get rid of a lot of those charts.
Madam Chairman, if you want to show one of them, to show the spike going down to the detail, that might be useful. And then just say, we've got the other three, the same kind of stuff.
Okay.
Or, yeah,
Good.
that's another way to
Good
do it
advice.
too, so that you can,
Okay.
okay. So what I need to know, because we do have to go to MPO, and probably I know folks are going to need to get lunch on the way or at the cafeteria. Before you finish, and I apologize for this,
That's okay.
we've got two other items on the agenda that I am assuming the ballot language is the priority out of the other two items. The citizen advisory and oversight committee is,
Yes.
I know is important, but I'm assuming it's ballot language that is the more important out of those two. So I'm going to say if you can try to finish this up, then we'll jump to the ballot language and we'll put off the other item.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know if you can put off the other item about track committee.
Well, we already had the legislative committee endorse it.
Okay, we're all
But
right with that.
we could do that.
I mean, unless we were all going to agree to be late to MPO.
No, I don't want to do that.
Because, I mean, it's a pretty important meeting today. That's what I'm saying. I don't care. I'll stay. It's not that I don't want to be here. It's,
Right, well, I'm glad you made those comments, and I do also want my time to adjust my presentation.
yes.
My friend Heather back there, before the MPO, again, the MPO.
Yeah, like pages like this, I think you could get rid of that altogether.
Okay,
Because nobody can really see it. It's kind of glaze over.
I did delete a lot of these at the finance committee, and then I couldn't answer.
Yeah, but see, but that's because that's who they are. So you got to think of your audience. You want those pages for them. For MPO and the county,
Okay.
you don't need those pages.
So there
But
are,
you might want to put them on the website.
yeah, oh,
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely. I'm just
So-
saying in your presentation,
Yeah.
absolutely put them in your website.
So there are I've covered 2 of the 4. The other 2 I will not cover, but they are, the story is similar. The case where what if the light rail cost more than they expected over and the top of the contingency, and the federal government and the state government didn't pitch in any more money to cover those cost overruns? That was covered under this scenario. And again, Ernst & Young manage those funds. Probably the new item on this one that they changed, that they didn't change in the other ones, they looked at 2 scenarios, a 10% cost overrun and a 15. Under the 10%, they pretty much did the same, just increase the borrowing. Under the 15 scenario, they also changed the assumption on PSTA's cost of operating expenses growing over time down to 3.25% instead of 3.5%. That's what they had
Right.
a month ago anyway. So that's not that big of a deal.
That's a good page, by the way, that previous, go back. That is a good page. This next page that you just went to, nobody cares.
Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
we care.
Okay.
The website's good. The rest of
The
people don't
last
care.
scenario is what if there's recessions? What if there are recessions that kick in? And Ernst & Young has done a doozy on this one to make it as painful as possible, at least what they think it would be as painful as possible, if recessions would kick in right when we started the sales tax in 17 and right when we started the big capital construction of the rail. What if recessions occurred at those times? I don't seem to have that chart, but
Yeah,
and they basically tried to manage how they could do that. Both of those scenarios would require PSTA to lower its operating and maintenance costs down to that 3.25%. But otherwise, they would do sort of the same sort of internal financing changes to manage those programs. So this slide kind of shows the summary of all of the different mitigation strategies that Ernst & Young used to manage those. The question comes up, what if more than one of those scenarios happens at the same time?
Which is likely.
Which is possible.
It's likely. Well, it's likely if one is going to happen that you're going to have more than one together. If something does happen.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying is likely.
That leads to additional measures that they haven't used, but that we could
Wait.
use.
Do we have a quorum if Patricia leaves?
We do. 3.
We're okay? Okay. Just check.
And so then you kind of go onto this page. There's been some questions in some of the meetings that they are assuming things that are listed on this page, like right-of-way donations, TIF funded districts and stuff. They're not assuming any of these. we don't need any of these under the base or even under these individual stress case scenarios, but if it was even worse, the PSTA board would always be able to look at these kind of options. The other thing which we can always look at is adjusting the service, adjusting the 65% growth and not increase by 65, but by 58% or whatever is in the growth of our service. They finish by saying this is a marathon, not a sprint. It's really the ongoing management of the system. Keep it within the operating funds that is the key. And so that leads us to the action item. Again, there's a resolution in your packet that would be we drafted a resolution to describe the PSTA endorsement of the Greenlight Canals plan. The PSTA board meets on November 20th, next Wednesday, and we'll consider this Greenlight Canals plan resolution that's in your packet. At the Finance Committee, just earlier this morning, Mr. Johnson recommended, and the Finance Committee motion included adding a whereas clause to the resolution that spoke to at sort of at the top of the resolution that spoke to the inadequacy of the current transit system that we have now and the limitations that it provided that caused the need to take a look and to recommend this Greenlight plan as an alternative. So we will, between now and the 20th, you'll see a draft of such a whereas.
Can I just add something on the, if you go back one slide? I think it's important, well, for all of us, but to especially outside agencies, is, when you talk about long-term O&M cost management, this is sort of part of that, but I think it's important, especially talking to outside agencies, so that they're aware that that Ernst & Young is providing us with a modeling system that we can, that this is just not a report that's going to sit on the shelf. We're going to be utilizing it forever or long-term.
Yeah.
So I just think that that's, from an outside agency, that's an important thing to either have on your slide or to say. Okay, sorry. Okay, so we have a, I'm sorry.
I feel one thing, when we're looking at the charts, and you're probably not going to be using many of them here, but when we look at the cash balance versus the discounted or the debt service cash reserve, the debt service cash reserve is probably going to be an estimate that will be important up to maybe 2020, when they actually commit to the debt. So they, at that point, when they're pricing the bonds and doing the whole thing, they're going to be making an estimate about, does this really work? And
right.
So after that, it doesn't really matter very much, because what the charts show is that there's going to be plenty of cash. And I think that's one of, so the commitment to do the debt is over in 2020. But the concern for financing the whole thing is going to go on for another 30 years. And I think what the charts show, the money's going to be there.
I think you're correct.
So whatever, so it's,
the only thing I would say is that once you actually issue the debt, you are required to maintain a debt service reserve, a specific debt service reserve.
yeah, but yet that's different from.
That's different from these ratios.
Yeah. So that the ratio is, it gets to be academic after 2020. What really counts is that the money is going to be used.
Okay. We have a resolution. You're asking us to recommend, so you want an action item from us to recommend to the PSTA Board of Directors to move forward with this resolution. So we're not voting on the resolution and recommending we're just asking PSTA Board to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, is there any public comment? Seeing or hearing none. Do I have a motion?
So with the same.
Yes, language.
as finance committee.
Is that a second? Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously.